This may be the weirdest recession, non-recession ever in history, but what actually makes this recession different, how spending changed, what do you need to know for your portfolio? We're also going to take a look at what is now becoming known as downgrade season here. I'm going to coin that phrase. U.S. recently got downgraded. We're also seeing a number of the major banks being put on watch lists. A lot of downgrade happening on the small to medium-sized banks as well. How can you protect your portfolio from the banks in the U.S. and what's going on there, and how can we definitely take advantage of that going forward? Finally, we're going to take a look at pickleball, how loud the sport actually is. Now that's moving away from the retirement homes where all they had to do was turn down their hearing aids and get out onto the main streets. Again, started early in the morning, waking up people with quite the racket. My name is Trevor Miller from Cherry Hill Private Wealth. Enjoy this week's perspective. So are we actually heading into a recession? Is it going to be a soft landing? On any day, you can read several different articles or points of view and hear divergent opinions on where the economy is actually heading. One thing is true, however, is that we've changed our spending habits, and predictions are that this is going to continue throughout the last half of 2023 and into 2024. Spending habits hadn't really changed in most of our lifetime until the pandemic. Sure, I mean, we bought some different things, but usually we had a travel budget, we had an entertainment budget, home renovation budget, and repair budget. We had all these buckets that remained fairly consistent until 2020 happened. There were now the obvious changes in spending in 2020, like toilet paper, cleaning wipes, and aerosol disinfectants rose by over 100%, while general cleaning supplies were up by over 40% early in the pandemic. Surprisingly, with the happy hour Zoom calls and day drinking getting a huge tick up over previous years, drug purchases actually went down considerably year over year. Americans only spent $21.6 billion on drug purchases in 2020, and although that might sound like a pretty huge number, it's almost 52% lower than 2019's $44.9 billion. With employment numbers holding steady well into 2023, a decline in inflation rate, and surprisingly resilient stock markets, many consumers are still worried about the future. As we got locked into our homes and came to terms that we were going to miss those concerts and those restaurant outings were not going to happen with any consistency, we really started changing our spending habits. Reports showed that almost 2/3 of Americans, and Canada was right there as well, changed their spending habits in 2020 and 2021. Many people turned to they're spending towards personal care, home gym equipment, home renovations, hot tubs. Trying to get a contractor was almost impossible during the start of the pandemic, and sometimes this would take as many as several months before you could actually get someone in. During this time as well, material prices surged, if you can even find what you're looking for. Now, we're 3 years past the onset of the pandemic, so we're seeing another huge shift in spending habits. In this post-pandemic era, we're starting to see a new reality on spending. Even with inflation rapidly falling, many believe that the tightening isn't quite over yet. Consumers, for the most part, are feeling that right now is pretty okay, but there's still some unrest about what the future is actually going to hold. Real personal spending, even when adjusted for inflation, has hit a new high in June. So people are still out there spending money. And according to some recent data, the spending has definitely changed. Pepsi's CEO Raymond Laguerta said that consumers are now looking for better deals, and there's been an increase in purchases made at dollar stores and club retailers. We're also seeing the same sentiment backed by Walmart's recent reports showing that their private label, which is priced well below the competition, has been a really big winner recently. When looking at home renovations, which was a huge winner during the rolling lockdowns, the leading indicator of remodeling activity, or LIRA, that report predicted that almost a 14% decrease in renovation spending this year. They're predicting the spending rates will fall from 16.3% at the end of 2022 to 2.6% by the end of 23. The tightening from the Fed and the Bank of Canada has led to higher costs to borrow, which means that homeowners now will likely shy away from dipping into that line of credit to finance home renovations. And as slowdowns occur, there'll likely be a decrease in material costs, but the LIRA report cautions expectations that contractors will actually lower the prices as well. So what does this mean for your investments and where you should be putting your money? Well, as consumer spending changes, obviously this is where we're going to be finding more and more of our rates of return. So we're going to keep looking at where that spending is occurring, where consumers are trying to save, where they're trying to make some money, and that will be a good opportunity for us going forward as these sorts of things change coming out of this pandemic, and with that higher inflation as well. As the U.S. deficits continue to grow, the credit agencies like Fitch are now downgrading the U.S.'s AAA credit rating to a AA+. So from the highest possible to the second highest possible. The cost of service U.S. debt now equals nearly 2% of the entire GDP, which is a pretty astounding number. In 2022, the U.S. government spent $476 billion on interest costs, which was up 35% from 2021. So pretty astounding increase in that. Estimates are that the interest costs will reach 1.1 trillion. That's interest costs alone by 2029, which will make up about 3.2% of the GDP, which will put it at the highest rates that the U.S. has ever seen. Now, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called the Fitch decision puzzling, but it's tough to deny that the U.S. fiscal situation has deteriorated substantially since the Standard & Poor's decreased rating in 2011. And this is where I find it really interesting that, someone in that position would find this puzzling. If we take a look at our personal spending, if all of a sudden now our credits is maxed out, we're going to have a decrease in our overall credit score as well. So the U.S. very similar, and they're seeing that interest become a lot more, especially as inflation and everything else keeps ticking up. If we take a look back at 2011, when the S&P downgraded the U.S. for the first time in its history, the debt ratio was about 65% of GDP, while predictions are now that it'll reach 98.2% by the end of September. Fitch also noted in its report that the ratio is 39% higher than the median for AAA borrowers across the globe. So, pretty markedly higher than everywhere else. Increases in payouts to Social Security and Medicare are likely to cause further debt as more boomers start collecting these benefits, which is really predicted over the next couple of years. Fitch Ratings said that the downgrade of the U.S. reflects the expected fiscal deterioration over the next 3 years, a high and growing general government debt burden, and the erosion of governance relative to AA and AAA rated peers over the last 2 decades has now manifested in repeated debt limit standoffs and last minute resolutions. So, they're definitely seeing that there's some infighting in the U.S. as well when it comes to the politics, which makes the resolution of these things a lot more difficult. And that, however, wasn't the only downgrade that we saw these past couple of weeks. Moody's cut the credit rating of several small and mid-sized U.S. banks as well last week. Major U.S. lenders such as the Bank of New York Mellon, State Street, and others were put under a review for potential downgrade as well. But Moody's wasn't done there. It also changed the outlook to negative for 11 other banks such as Capital One, Citizens Financial, and Fifth Third Bancorp. So what does this all mean? If we take a look to the U.S.'s downgrade, we can definitely look back at 2011 when, for the first time in history, the U.S. saw the S&P downgrade their credit rating. In 2011, the immediate reaction in the stock markets was negative, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average seeing its largest one-day point drop since the financial crisis in 2008. There was much volatility in the months and weeks to come, but by the end of 2011, the markets had largely recovered. The Federal Reserve helped with the stability throughout the accommodative monetary policy that was put in place, meaning that it really continued to keep interest rates low and implement various quantitative easing programs. We've seen similar market pullbacks since the news broke, and 10 days later, as I'm recording this, we have seen the S&P drop by about 2.2%. In 2023 version of the credit downgrade, we see similar issues that we saw in 2011, but many are just not so pronounced. The low interest rate environment in 2011 doesn't really exist in 2023, and there doesn't appear to be an appetite from the Fed to reduce those interest rates while inflation still is persistent in the way it is. When it comes to the negative outlook on many of the U.S. banks, we can see several risks with substantial unrealized losses in their safe holdings. I covered more of this in the last video on bonds and fixed income. Go have a look at that. I kind of get into this a little bit more about some of the issues there. Moody expects the risks to be exacerbated by the significant increase in the Federal Reserve's policy. So with the tightening policy, banks will have less ability to lend money to the same extent they were lending previously, and with huge potential losses in the reserves, many of these banks could be in significant trouble. As banks across the U.S. face enormous hurdles in the months to come and credit downgrades in the U.S., what does this mean for your portfolio? As I talked about in the last episode, JP Morgan and BlackRock, amongst others, are really predicting a move towards private credit that could provide the safest and best returns in the coming month for your fixed income portfolios. If that's something you want to know more about, please reach out. We are kind of the leader in this industry in Canada, so happy to help you with that and kind of point you in the right direction on how to put this into your portfolio. So have you jumped on the pickleball bandwagon? That is fun to say. if you haven't, and I haven't quite yet, you've at least heard of it or are hearing it being played in your local area. This was a sport that was once relegated to the retirees, but is now hitting basically all generations. And this game is becoming so popular that last year alone, almost 9 million Americans played it regularly, while another 27 million played it at least once. That makes pickleball almost as popular as running, so it has become one of the most popular pastimes in the US and Canada. Social media is all abuzz about this new phenomenon that is going across the world, but there's a substantial new issue that has come out with the explosion of pickleball. But as this increases and more and more people are playing it, there becomes a significant issue that we're starting to see, and we're finding new courts. And even in my neighborhood, there's somebody that has painted a pickleball court onto their driveway, so it's definitely taken off. And what's happening is that the actual game is really loud.
Whoa. Hey, they went in the other one. They went in this one.
Oh!
And there are a couple of instances where just ordinary people are just trying to live and sleep near these pickleball courts have had some serious issues. There's apartment dwellers in North California who had to move out because of the game's relentless noises. A suburb area in Kansas City, people are actually filing a lawsuit against the adjacent country club that is having this noise pollution, waking them up at 6 a.m. I'm not sure who's getting up to play pickleball at 6 a.m., but I guess you got to get in your game before your long day of work. But don't worry, pickleball enthusiasts, there seems to be a solution on the horizon. Bob Unitek, retired engineer and Carnegie Mellon University professor and founder of Pickleball Sound Mitigation LLC, has become the go-to source for information in this pickleball wars that are going across the U.S. here. Bob, like so many others living in Florida, that general age of 80, kind of got into pickleball and started playing this with his neighbors. And he quickly became an avid player, certified referee, just obsessed with this sport. And what he really found was the decibel level was just huge. It was loud, it was high pitched, and often played early in the morning. So basically, Bob's made it his manifesto to now, at his ripe old age of 80, to put his engineering background and love of pickleball at the forefront. And he's developing new paddles and balls that are being approved by the pickleball community associations, and even looking at some new flooring that will really reduce the noise and really lets the pickleball lovers and the people that are trying to sleep get along in peace and quiet. So there is an answer on the horizon, and thank you, Bob, for doing your part to keep our neighborhoods quiet and our retirees out playing the game that they love so much. Well, that about wraps it for this week. I hope you enjoyed. Lots happening when it comes to recession, non-recession, what's going on with the downgrades. Lots of opportunities there as well for your portfolio. And get out, play some pickleball. Not at 6 a.m., not in my neighborhood, please, unless you've got Bob's new paddles and balls. Until next time, enjoy, and we'll talk to you later.